How's it going, YouTube? Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my content, hit that like and subscribe button. And also, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Today we're going to take a look at Roxanne Starfall Savant. This will probably be the last deck tech I do for Outlaws of Thunder Junction as we move into Modern Horizons 3 and the imminent Assassin's Creed. Okay, so this is a Gruul deck tech. Roxanne is 3 in a red and a green for a 4/3. Whenever Roxanne Starfall Savant enters the battlefield or attacks, create a tapped colorless artifact token named Meteor. When Meteorite enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, and tap to add 1 mana of any color. Whenever you tap an artifact token for mana, add 1 mana of any type that artifact token produced. So we're going to double up on token things, that token mana, basically. So treasure mana, meteorites, you name it. And we're also going to be abusing the meteorite trigger. All right, let's jump into creatures. We're going to start with the obvious choice here, Academy Manufactor. This is 3 for a 1/3. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure, instead create one of each. It's a staple. We got Ancient Copper Dragon. This is 4 and 2 red for a 6/5 with flying. Whenever Ancient Copper Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Got Birds of Paradise for 1 green, 0/1 with flying. You can tap this to add mana of any color. Crime Novelist for 2 and a red. This is a 1/3. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Crime Novelist and add red. Displaced Dinosaurs for 5 and 2 green. This is a 7/7. As a historic permanent enters the battlefield under your control, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature in addition to its other types. Eternal Witness for 2 and 2 green. This is a 2/1. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Goblin Anarchomancer for 1 red and 1 green. This is a 2/2. Each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. Goldspan Dragon for 3 and 2 red. This is a 4/4 with flying and haste. Whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. Treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. Goldvein Hydra. This is X in a green for a 0/0 with vigilance, trample, and haste. Goldvein Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and when Goldvein Hydra dies, create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to its power. Hellkite Tyrant for 4 and 2 red. This is a 6/5 with flying and trample. Whenever Hellkite Tyrant deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Ingenious Artillerist for 2 and a red. This is a 3/1. When 1 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, Ingenious Artillerist deals that much damage to each opponent. Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. This is 2 and a green for a 2/3. Tokens you control have tap to add for green. Also has choose a background. Jolene, Plundering Pugilist. This is 1 a red and a green for a 4/2. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures with power 4 or greater, create a treasure token. And for 1 and a red, you can sacrifice a treasure token, and Jolene, Plundering Pugilist deals 1 damage to any target. We got Jolene, the Plunderer Queen for 2 a red and a green. This is a 2/2. Whenever a player attacks 1 or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a treasure token. If you would create a 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token, and sacrifice 5 treasures. Put 5 +1/+1 counters on Jolene. We got Kibo, Uktabi Prince. This is 2 and a green for a 2/2. You can tap this to have each player create a colorless artifact token named Banana. With tap, sacrifice this artifact, add red or green, you gain 2 life. Whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that's an ape or a monkey. Whenever Kibo attacks, defending player sacrifices an artifact. We have Magda Brazen Outlaw. For 1 and a red, this is a 2/1. Other dwarves you control get +1/+0. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token, and sacrifice 5 treasure tokens. Search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Then we have Magda the Horde Master. This is 1 and a red for a 2/2. Whenever you commit a crime, create a tapped treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then sacrifice 3 treasures. Create a 4/4 red Scorpion Dragon creature token with flying and haste. Activate only as a sorcery. We have Old Gnawbone for 5 and 2 green. This is a 7/7 with flying. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. We have Ortheon, Hero of Lavabrink. For 3 and a red, this is a 3/3. You can pay 1 and a red and tap this to create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. For 6 and 3 red, you can tap this to create 5 tokens that are copies of another target creature you control. They gain haste. Sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. We've got Professional Facebreaker for 2 and a red. This is a 2/3 with Menace. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. Sacrifice a treasure. Exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Reckless Fireweaver for 1 and a red. This is a 1/3. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. Sarenth Steelseeker for 1 and a green. This is a 1/2. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put that card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. Svella Ice Shaper for 1, a red and a green. This is a 2/4. You can pay 3 and tap this to create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manolith. With tap, add 1 mana of any color. You can also pay 6, a red and a green, and tap this to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. We got Tireless Provisioner for 2 and a green. This is a 3/2 with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. I believe this is the last one. Nope, one more. Wolfgar of Icewind Dale for 3, a red and a green. This is a 4/4 with melee. And if a creature you control attacking would you cause a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Then finally we have Zorn for 2 and a red. This is a 3/2. If you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. Alright, next is Instants. Starting with Beast Within for 2 and a green, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Big Score for 3 and a red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and create 2 treasures. Chaos Warp for 2 and a red. The owner of target a permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. Comet Storm for X and 2 red with multi-kicker 1. Choose target creature or player. Then choose another target creature or player for each time Comet Storm was kicked. Comet Storm deals X damage to each of them. Demand Answers for 1 and a red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, draw 2 cards. Great Train Heist for 1 red. This has Spree. You can add onto it 2 and a red. Untap all creatures you control. If it's your combat phase, there is an additional combat phase after this one. You can also choose to and or add this for 2 more. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. And then finally, for +1 red, which is also an and or, choose target opponent. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to that player, create a tapped treasure token. Next up, we have Heroic Intervention for 1 and a green. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Second Harvest for 2 and 2 green. For each token you control, create a token that is a copy of that permanent. And then finally, we have Unexpected Windfall For 2 and 2 red, as an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and create 2 treasures. Next up is sorceries. Starting with Blasphemous Act. For 8 and a red, this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. Brass's Bounty. For 6 and a red, for each land you control, create a treasure token. Cultivate. For 2 and a green, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. Farseek. For 1 and a green, search your library for a mountain, plains, island, or swamp. Put that onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Hell to Pay. For X and a red, Hell to Pay deals X damage to target creature. Create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the amount of excess damage dealt to that creature this way. Jessica's Will. For 2 and a red, choose 1. If you control your commander, as you cast the spell, you may choose both. Add red to your mana pool for each card in target opponent's hand. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. Kodama's Reach. For 2 and a green, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. Nature's Lore. For 1 and a green, search your library for any forest. Put that directly into play. This does not count towards your 1 land drop per turn limit. Reshuffle library afterwards. I love old cards. Rampant Growth. For 1 and a green, search the library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. 3 Visits. For 1 and a green, search the library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Alright, next up is Artifacts. Starting with Amulet of Vigor. For 1, whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped under your control, untap it. Arcane Signet. Costs 2. You can tap this to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Blade of Selves. For 2. Equipped creature has Myriad. Equips for 4. Bootlegger's Stash. For 5 and a green, lands you control have tap. Create a treasure token. Conjurer's Closet. For 5, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that creature to the battlefield under your control. Helm of Hosts. For 4, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that is a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste. Equips for 5. Idol of Oblivion. For 2, you can tap this to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you created a token this turn. You can also pay 8, tap this and sacrifice it to create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. Lightning Greaves. Costs 2. Equipped creature has Haste and Shroud. Equips for 0. Panharmonicon. Costs 4. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Skyclave Relic. For 3. This has Kicker for 3. It has Indestructible. When Skyclave Relic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic. You can tap this to add 1 mana of any color. Soul Ring. Costs 1. You can tap this to add 2 to your mana pool. Swiftfoot Boots. Costs 2. Equipped creature has Hexproof and Haste, and equips for 1. And then finally we have Talisman of Impulse. Costs 2. You can tap this for colorless, or you can tap this for red and green, and Talisman of Impulse deals 1 damage to you. Okay, next up is our enchantments. Starting with Aggravated Assault. For 2 and a red. You may pay 3 and 2 red to untap all creatures you control. If it's a main phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Activate only as a sorcery. City of Death is 2 and a green, is a saga. Chapter 1 is create a treasure token, and Chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are create a token that's a copy of target non-saga token you control. City on Fire. For 5 and 3 red. This has Convoke. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. Doubling Season. For 4 and a green. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. If an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead. Fiery Emancipation for 3 and 3 red. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. Parallel Lives for 3 and a green. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Reign of Riches for 3 and 2 red. When Reign of Riches enters the battlefield, create 2 treasure tokens. The first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. And then finally we have Rhythm of the Wild for 1, a red, and a green. Creatures you control can't be countered, and non-token creatures you control have Riot. Alright, next up is non-basic lands. Starting with Cinderglade, this is a check land for red-green that has basic land typings. Command Tower, which taps to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Commercial District, which is a surveil land for red-green with basic land typings. Crag Crown Pathway, which is an MDFC for red-green. Fomori Volt, which taps for colorless. You can also pay 3 and tap this to discard a card. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put 1 of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Game Trail, which is a check land for... Is it a check land? No, this is a reveal land for red-green. Karplusan Forest, which is a pain land for red-green. Kessig Wolf Run, which taps for colorless. You can also pay X, a red and a green, and tap this to have target creature get +X/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. Rockfall Vale, which is a check land for red-green. Rogue's Passage, which you can tap for colorless, or you can pay 4 and tap this to have target creature become unblockable until end of turn. Rootbound Crag, which is a check land for red-green. Spire Garden, which is a crowd land for red-green. Stomping Ground, which is a shock land for red-green with basic land typings. Treasure Vault, which you can tap for colorless, or you can pay 2X and tap this and sacrifice it to create X treasure tokens. And finally, Wooded Foothills, which is a fetch land for red-green. Alright, lastly, we're looking at basics. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 forests, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 mountains. Alright, so that is Roxanne. So as you can see, the big thing here is taking advantage of the ETB/attack trigger, which creates Meteorites. We have a lot of doublers in here to help create multiple Meteorites, a lot of things that double triggered abilities, Panharmonicon, as well as the other card that I can't remember all of a sudden, to increase the Wolfgar of Icewind Dale, which increases the number of triggers of this ability that you get. We have ways to increase the amount of damage that the Meteorites do when they enter, via City on Fire and Fiery Emancipation. We also are taking advantage of multiple combats with things like Aggravated Assault and the Great Train Heist. And just in general, we're trying to create basically anything in here that creates an artifact token that creates mana. So treasures, bananas, manoliths, skyclave relics, you name it. We're trying to create those as well as meteorites in order to really take advantage of the double mana that Roxanne gives you from those. And then finally, things like Amulet of Vigor are in here so that the treasures, when they come into play untapped, as well as the meteorites themselves, which come into play tapped. So this helps them to be usable immediately. So that is Roxanne. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Keep it positive. I'll remove negative comments. And that's kind of it. Until next time, guys. Peace.